You're the one. What mad thing are you doing?
Mad? The one who has sold the secret of life to be considered mad?
Hello to all the classic people that are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors. As a technical note, references and citations are listed for each show on the site at classicmovierev.com. Today on the Classic Movie Reviews podcast, we are taking on The Vampire Bat, 1933. I can't believe it's October already. Where did the summer go? Oh yes, we were hiding inside to protect against the plague. Before I get into the movie, I want to thank nickname 729364 for leaving that great review on Apple Podcast. As nickname requested, I will throw some Hitchcock into the mix. Look for something in November as part of the Norvember celebration. Did Hitchcock make film noir? You bet he did. Leaving reviews is the number one way you can help the show grow. There's another way as well. We now have merch. Look for links on the site or in the show notes. Let's get back to The Vampire Bat, 1933. Many people think this is the movie with Bela Lugosi, but that's the film The Devil Bat, 1940. Our film, The Vampire Bat, 1933, has a few different names that include Bloodsucker, Forced to Sin, and a Spanish dub version with the same title. IMDb.com rates this movie 5.7. About right. This film ain't Dracula 1931. This film has a 60% on the tomato meter and a dismal 26% audience approval on RottenTomatoes.com. On January 23, 1933, New York Times film critic ADS stated, quote, "Bats flew in and out of windows, women screamed, strong men blanched, and Lionel Atwill drained the lifeblood of simple peasants in the interest of science. The Vampire Bat is a mystery as well as a horror picture, so that it is not well to inquire too deeply into the activities of Mr. Atwill," unquote. Continuing later, quote, "The film is acted somberly by Mr. Atwill, heroically by Mr. Douglas, and in the conventional feminine pattern for those matters by the heroine, Fay Wray. Dwight Fry wins a few mild chills with his sinister portrayal of a peasant who domesticates bats for his amusement and who is ultimately chased with torches through the night. But they have the wrong man there. Mr. Atwill is the man to be watched by those who expect to be terrorized by the Vampire Bat," unquote. This movie is not going to win any awards. However, it's free on Prime right now, and it's nice to see Fay Wray say a few lines. Melvyn Douglas is excellent in this one, and Dwight Fry is terrific as kind of a village idiot. And although very stiff, Lionel Atwill does a solid job as the doctor. The Burgermeister provides a good lesson on not jumping to conclusions and not following the mob. By the way, the mob had torches and dogs, but no pitchforks. Budget cuts? Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Lionel Atwill performed well as the evil Dr. Otto von Neumann. Atwill was first covered in Son of Frankenstein 1939. He is the guy that was also busted for hosting a wild sex party. Fay Wray was pretty good as laboratory assistant Ruth. She hadn't made the monkey movie yet. Fay Wray was first covered in King Kong 1933. Melvyn Douglas was pretty darn good as the vampire skeptical investigator Carl. He was also the boyfriend of Ruth. Douglas was first covered in the anti-war film The Americanization of Emily 1964. Dwight Fry was fantastic as the village dolt and creepy guy Herman. Fry was first covered in Bride of Frankenstein 1935, but his laughing in this film was on par with rats, rats, rats in Dracula 1931. However, in this case it was bats, bats, bats. Lionel Belmore played Burgermeister Schoen. He was born in England in 1867. Belmore, the child of an acting family, was a successful character actor in the 1920s and 30s. He began on Broadway in 1899, and he moved into film by 1914. In addition to playing the Burgermeister in The Vampire Bat 1933, Belmore was also the Burgermeister in Frankenstein 1931. He died in 1953. Robert Fraser played the unwitting Emile. Fraser was born in Massachusetts in 1891. Successful as a leading man in silent films, being the first person to play Robin Hood on film in Robin Hood 1912. When sound film became common, he became a background character. He is best known for 3 films: Two Gun Caballero, 1931, The Vampire Bat, 1933, and The Fighting Parson, 1933. He was often cast as cowboys or an Indian. Frazier died in 1944. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Following bat-themed credits, a swarm of bats are shown flying around the lights in Kleinschloss, Germany. The town clock shows 7:30 p.m. A hunched man with a lantern is walking through the town when he hears the bay of a wolf. He hurries along. Upstairs, a woman screams, and her lights go out. The bats fly from their perches. Hanging, perches, places in the trees. The scene changes to Burgermeister Schoen's Lionel Belmore's office. They are meeting about the 6 mysterious deaths in the previous 6 weeks.
Last night, 5 others before him, that's 6 within as many weeks, Inspector. Our friends, neighbors that we've known for years, drained of their life's blood, found dead in bed, lifeless skeletons of skin and bone. Vampires are at large, I tell you, vampires.
Carl, Melvyn Douglas, is skeptical about the presence of vampires. The other men talk about the outbreaks of bats and the historic rise of vampirism. In 1643, they executed a vampire, later cutting off his head and staking his heart. Carl says the only bats that drink blood are in South America. Carl scoffs as they tell that the vampire can take the form of a bat or a human. Carl says he's been looking for a human killer. Right on cue, the wolves howl again.
Good night, gentlemen. Don't let the vampires get you.
A large mansion, maybe a castle, is shown from the outside. Inside is a laboratory with bubbling tubes and capacitors with electrical charges. Carl makes his way down to the lab, where he plants a big old kiss on the lab assistant Ruth, Fay Wray. They are boyfriend and girlfriend, and she works for Dr. Otto von Neumann. Lionel Atwill. Carl and Ruth lament that the silly town council thinks the problem is vampires. Aunt Gussie, Maud Eburn, comes in with some coffee. She says Ruth should be working in a clean and warm hospital. Carl scares Aunt Gussie with tales of vampires. A young male lab assistant, Emil, Robert Frazier, comes in and leaves looking for Dr. von Neumann. Dr. von Neumann is giving a medical exam to an old apple woman, Martha, Rita Carlisle. After the exam, he tells her nurse to keep giving her the patent medicine another doctor has left. The door opens and Herman, Dwight Fry, comes into the room. While the others look at Herman with contempt, he sweetly gives Martha some small flowers. Dr. von Neumann orders that the windows be opened, and he sends the nurse away for the night.
It's stifling in here. Open these windows.
Herman open windows. Me do.
Herman is devoted to Martha. Apparently, Martha was attacked by a bat. Herman defends bats, saying they're soft like cats. Herman is sent away by the nurse. On the street, Dr. von Neumann talks to the hunchman about bats flying around. Herman listens to the conversation. Herman defends the bats again. Dr. von Neumann is very interested in the fact that Herman plays with bats. Later, the town folks watch Herman catch and pet a bat. They now suspect Herman is the killer. In her room, Martha puts a crucifix and rosary around her neck. The nurse closes the window before leaving. Dr. von Neumann comes home to his lab, where he is met by Carl and Ruth. He tells Carl that he will talk over some theories with him the next day. Dr. von Neumann watches the couple leave, giving the first hint that he may be evil. He opens a locked door and goes inside. The town clock rings midnight. Martha's window opens and an unseen entity attacks her. Later, the dead Martha is in the morgue with 2 puncture marks on her neck. The hunched man is winding the city council up against Herman.
The vampire.
Yes, that's right. When I said I was going to tell you, his eyes glowed up like coals of fire. His hand reached out towards me, as if he were going to sink it into my throat.
And weigh this well. He never works and never begs, and yet he appears well fed always.
Town folks quickly get on board. Carl and Dr. von Neumann arrive at the morgue. Herman watches from the shadows outside the morgue. Herman climbs the steps to the morgue, and they call him a vampire. Dr. von Neumann examines the body and confirms from another doctor that the puncture wounds on the neck are the same as those of the other victims. The doctors both agree that teeth created the wounds. The Burgermeister throws some accusations against Herman. Herman runs out screaming when he sees that Martha has been killed. The hunchman says he saw Herman sneak into Martha's room before midnight. In the daytime, Ruth is reading in her garden. Herman comes sneaking around. He flees when he sees Carl coming. Dr. von Neumann talks to Aunt Gussie while Carl tries to make time with Ruth. Aunt Gussie goes to the garden and believes she is dying. When the couple leaves, Herman comes back into the garden. He distracts Aunt Gussie while he tries to steal food. She catches him but gives him an apple anyway. Upstairs, Dr. von Neumann, Carl, Ruth, and Emil are researching vampires. Aunt Gussie comes in and hears the talk. She is getting medicine for Herman, who has cut his hand. Carl is starting to believe the vampire business when the Burgermeister and his cronies come in. They tell that the hunchback man has been found murdered in the same manner as the others. They say Herman has disappeared. Carl tells the cronies to bring in Herman. Herman is still in the garden, acting crazy when Aunt Gussie comes to treat him. Then she realizes the man is Herman. He gives her a bat and she passes out.
You good like Martha. She give me apples. Herman like you.
Are you Herman?
Me, Herman. You give me apple? Herman give you nice soft bath.
The timely arrival of a rather large dog forces Herman to flee the garden. Aunt Gussie thinks Herman has turned into the dog and is going to kill her. Georgina, Stella Adams, the housekeeper, brings in Martha's rosary that she has found in Emil's room.
What is it, Georgiana?
I just found this in Emil's room.
Well,
It belonged to my friend, Martha Mueller.
certain.
I gave it to her myself. Martha died last night. I find her crucifix in Emil's room. Doesn't that mean Emil is the one Herr Brettschneider is seeking?
She also tells Dr. von Neumann that Emil tracked mud in after the murder. Dr. von Neumann says for her not to speak to anyone about the subject and have Emil come to him. The villagers, with dogs and torches, chase Herman into the mountains. None of them have pitchforks. Herman runs into a cave. They follow him into the cave. They almost have him caught when he jumps off a cliff to his death.
Come on. You're going with us, Herman.
No.
You're going with us.
No.
Come on. Come on, Herman. We won't hurt you. Come on.
No. No.
One of the men says he is going down to finish the job. Dr. von Neumann hypnotizes Emil and sends him to kill Georgina.
You must be careful, Emil. Very careful.
Emil does as he is bade and brings Georgina to the back part of the laboratory. Georgina is placed on a table in front of a fish tank with wires and tubes. Inside is a ham-sized sponge or hunk of coral. Dr. von Neumann puts a clamp on Georgina's neck that makes the puncture marks. He begins draining her blood. Later, Georgina is dead in her bed with Martha's rosary on the ground. Aunt Gussie, Ruth, and Carl come to see Dr. von Neumann. Aunt Gussie goes to bed. Carl, Ruth, and Dr. von Neumann drink coffee by the fireplace. They don't know that Herman is dead.
Have they located Herman yet?
No, not a trace of him. I hate to think of that poor misfit being hunted down like a dog. You know, I simply can't bring myself to believe in that vampire theory.
Upstairs, Aunt Gussie discovers the dead Georgina. Emil comes out to help, knowing nothing about what he has done. Dr. von Neumann tells Carl that he talked to Georgina a few minutes after 10. The wounds in her neck and lack of blood are making Carl think it might be vampires. Carl remembers that Herman was in the garden earlier in the day. Carl starts focusing in on Emil. Dr. von Neumann says Herman had the rosary in his hands at Martha's, and he was at this house today.
Can you positively identify this as belonging to Martha? Without a doubt. I saw it in her room the night she died. How in the world did it get here? Herman Gleib was in her room. He had that crucifix in his hands. And Herman was here today.
Maybe here now, for all we know.
The rosary and the disappearance of Herman lead Carl to believe Herman is the killer. Carl tells Ruth to stay locked in her room. Emil returns from the front door, and the Burgermeister has come to tell that Herman fell to his death. The time of Herman's fall was 9 p.m. Carl tells the Burgermeister about Georgina's murder. Dr. von Neumann says a natural death wouldn't kill a vampire. The Burgermeister tells that the hunting party did drive a stake through Herman's heart.
What time did this happen?
Quite early, about 9 o'clock. The cave is nearly 2 hours from here. That's why we didn't hear it sooner.
Well, it may interest you to know that there's been another death after your vampire died.
Who?
Dr. von Neumann's housekeeper. Right here in her own room.
Mother of mercy. What are we going to do?
But a natural death wouldn't kill a vampire, Carl. You know the accepted theory. A stake driven through the heart.
Oh, yes, that's the theory, all right. But what?
But they did. They drove a stake through his heart.
Good God, are we living in the Middle Ages?
Herman's death and the staking leave Dr. von Neumann without a suspect to blame for the murder. Carl insists that the city properly bury Herman. Carl starts asking Dr. von Neumann what someone can do with 6 liters of human blood. Carl says that the last murder took place at Dr. von Neumann's home, and he will go over every inch of it until he finds a clue to the murder. Dr. von Neumann says Carl needs a rest, pulls out a bottle of poison, and tells Carl they will help him sleep. Carl's brain is in high gear. Carl goes back to his room and smokes. At 2 a.m., someone that looks like a vampire is crawling over Carl's roof. It is Emil, but he is being controlled by Dr. von Neumann. Carl turns out the lights, and Emil follows his instructions. Emil places his cape over Carl. Back at the house, Ruth hears Dr. von Neumann sending commands to Emil. Ruth's eyes show that she has worked out who is the killer. Dr. von Neumann comes to her room and tricks her into coming out the door. Ruth calls him mad, and he says he has created life and that the life form needs food.
You're the one. What mad thing are you doing?
Mad? The one who has solved the secret of life to be considered mad?
He says he is going to use her as part of the project. He straps her to a chair while he tends to the sea coral in the tank. There is a spinning fan behind her. Ruth sees someone come in the lab. Dr. von Neumann has his back turned. A cloaked figure has placed a wrapped body on the table. Dr. von Neumann turns on the light and removes the sheet. Laying on the bed is Emil. Carl is the masked figure. He reveals his face and pulls a gun. He says, "I didn't take your sleeping pills."
I didn't take your sleeping tablets, Doctor.
Aha! Carl goes to release Ruth, while Dr. von Neumann watches his every move. Dr. von Neumann starts saying Emil is the killer. He then jumps on Carl and starts fighting for the gun. Emil gets up and grabs the gun. As Carl takes Ruth outside, they hear 2 gunshots. Carl goes inside the back lab. Emil has killed Dr. von Neumann and committed suicide. They end with a bit of comedy. Dr. von Neumann has prescribed Epsom salts for Aunt Gussie to drink, obviously causing severe diarrhea. I'll be right back with conclusions and the world-famous short summary following a word from our sponsors. Summary. Lionel Atwill and Fay Wray were just coming off the Dr. X 1932 success and had Mystery of the Wax Museum 1933 already in the can. The studio was looking for a film to bridge the gap between the 2 completed movies. Majestic Pictures, a Poverty Row studio, was used to crank out the film in a short time frame. They were loaned or hired the actors and allowed to shoot at night on the Universal European Village set that had previously been used for Frankenstein 1931. These advantages gave The Vampire Bat 1933 the look of a traditional Universal picture. World famous short summary. Evil always hides where you least expect it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. You can find connections to social media and email on the site at classicmovierev.com or in the podcast show notes. If you enjoyed this show, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed, you can tell a friend, colleague, or family member about the show, or leave an Apple Podcast review. It really helps the show get found. We have merch now, so look for the links on the site and in the show notes. If you want to comment, suggest a movie, or help out, contact me by email at jec@classicmovierev.com. at classicmovierev.com. Beware the Moors.